There we are. And we'll let everybody in. Welcome, everyone, to VBC Happy Hour for Monday, November 27th. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the VBC. So happy to have you all a part of this and joining us tonight. Veterans Breakfast Club, our mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. For those of you new joining us, I see several new faces, including a recent guest for the Scuttlebutt, Pat D'Amico. Nice to see you again. I'm glad you're able to join us from Florida. Erica Webster. We have a lot of veterans in the room, a lot of new faces. I'm really excited to get to the full extent of the program tonight, all centered around Guantanamo Bay veterans. And I have kind of an idea because right now Todd is actually he's in flight to Vietnam. So co-starring with me tonight is Glenn Flickinger. Glenn, how are you doing this evening?
Well, I'm honored to be elevated to co-star. I didn't realize I could get that title. I'd have dressed nicer for it, you know.
I think you look great. You look wonderful. Yes,
it's a pleasure to be here and do anything I can to help you, Todd. Or Sean.
Oh, see,
it's a Freudian slip right there.
That's all right. I'll take it as a compliment. As you can see right there, Todd said, if you could let everybody know that we'll be above Alaska during the program, that would be great. I said, oh, of course, Todd, I'll let everybody know that you are currently flying above Alaska. I wonder if he's beaming in from the Wi-Fi on the plane, sucking all of the kilobytes out of that thing. They will be there for the next couple of weeks. So I will be your host for the next couple of weeks. And excited to be doing that and sharing that responsibility with everybody here. And I had an idea sort of what we could do with the program tonight, because we have so many veterans joining us from so many different eras and branches, and Guantanamo. I'm going to dive into a bit of some facts and different things throughout the program. It's sort of a round robin tonight, though I'll be hosting and sort of driving the bus. Feel free, if you're a GITMO vet and you're interested in something from a different era that you may not know about, feel free to just raise your hand or just ask a question, because we'll be bouncing around the room and sort of getting different stories from everybody. But first, before we get to all of that, and introduce everybody here, I would like to go ahead and thank our sponsor, which is always tobacco-free Adagio Health. They've been with us for quite a long time. We're really honored to have them sponsor the VBC, and they are dedicated to reducing and preventing tobacco use and to getting the word out about the hazards of smoking, secondhand smoke. They're all about health, so they want people to quit, and they have classes. They have nicotine replacement therapy, and they have a popular quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They also educate people, children especially, about tobacco use from cigars, cigarettes, pipes, chew snuff, and other nicotine products like vaping. And finally, they advocate for public and private policies that ensure healthy places to live, work, and play. You can learn all there is to know about tobacco-free Adagio Health on their website, tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. Thank you again, Tobacco Free, for sponsoring the VBC. You could hear me kind of being a little dazily. You heard last week that we took my son over to the emergency room. He had a high temperature. For those of you who heard that, he's doing better. But we all got blasted with COVID. We all got blasted with basically ear infections, antibiotics around the house. I like Glenn's idea is that now we're at the point where we're probably just going to go the nuclear option and burn the house down and go and move. So bear with me tonight. But we're doing well here. Everybody's slowly on the mend. If you haven't heard about it, we have a wonderful magazine. It's called the VBC Magazine. If you don't get it, it's because we don't have your address. Please send me your address and I'll make sure that you get a free copy. We send this out free quarterly and we're happy to do that. It's the best way that we have to market the VBC. We'll send you a box of 100 if you want, and feel free to distribute them for us if you'd like. But Elvis is our cover boy for this current issue. So again, just send me an address and we will make sure to get that out to you for free. That's the best deal in town. I can't make a deal better than that. You get awesome veteran stories for free. We have the Lioness, the Origin Story podcast, which I help Daria Summers host. It is an amazing podcast all about the women who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, from the Lioness in the Army to the FETs in the Marines and the CSTs, the Cultural Support Teams. We have another episode coming out this week, which will be our episode 9, and we're at 2,000 downloads in just under 3 to 4 months. An incredible mix of stories on this podcast. Please look it up, check it out. It's, as I said, phenomenal. Also on the Scuttlebutt, last week we released a new episode of the main podcast that I host for the BBC. My guest was Paul Woodage from WW2 TV. All you have to do is go to YouTube, type in either Paul Woodage or WW2 TV, and you will find a cornucopia of videos about World War II. This guy is you'd say an amateur historian, but I mean, I'd say full-blown historian. He was extremely knowledgeable, and what a storyteller. That's something that we hang our hat on with VBC, is just telling stories. And this guy has it. It was an amazing conversation I got to have with Paul, and my conversation with Pat will be coming up just next week, Pat. So our episode will release next week on Monday. There's where Todd's going. We're going to be getting to Gitmo here. But first, I want to just say thank you again, everyone, for joining us. If you could just wave your hand in front of your screen if you are a Guantanamo Bay veteran. Oh, boy. Yeah. So we have lots of. Okay. So since we have so many stories in the room and so many different veterans to talk to, if I don't get to you, if like we're getting through and I haven't gotten to you yet, give me a wave, give me a thing in the chat. We'll make sure to chime you in. First, the person that sort of helped me initiate this whole conversation was Erica Webster. Erica, I'll ask you to unmute. Erica, thank you so much, because you're the first person I went to and said, hey, we're thinking about doing this. I heard that you were a Guantanamo Bay veteran, and I'm glad that you said, yes, I'll get some of the vets together. And then we started promoting this, and then everybody said, hey, I'll join in. So thank you so much for helping to get the ball rolling with us.
Well, thanks for having us, and thanks for being interested in hearing what we have to say.
Oh, absolutely. So we'll start with you, Erica. Could you fill us in about sort of a bit of your background of, branch service and years?
So I was in the United States Army in the Military Police Corps on the correction side. So I was a 31 Echo, and I went to OSIT at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri in 2005. And right after that is when I went to Guantanamo Bay. And then I served 8 years on active duty, and I got out after that.
So your first duty assignment was Guantanamo?
Yes, I was 18.
And did you volunteer for that, or like how did that transpire, and what were your thoughts on it?
No, actually, so in basic training, towards the end, right before graduation, you're handed I don't know if it's still the same, but you're handed a brown manila envelope, and when you open it, it's your orders. So when I opened it, I was like, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba? Like, I have never even lived outside of my parents' house. So it was a big shocker. I had a really tough transition, being so far from home and away from my loved ones. But that's kind of where like the brother and sisterhood just automatically comes into play. And I see a couple of people on here who, I mean, it's been almost 20 years now, and it could be like we just saw each other yesterday. So I'm very thankful for those people that were there for me.
So it was a culture shock a bit to go into Guantanamo Bay and take your first duty assignment there. What was it like when you landed? I know we talk a lot about like, oh, you got into Iraq. What was that like? You got into Vietnam. What was that like? But hey, Guantanamo is quite a different sort of odd place.
Yeah. So like I said, I was in Missouri, so I had been acclimated to that type of atmosphere. And then you land in Guantanamo Bay and you're kind of on the water, and it felt like, I mean, the humidity and the heat, it was just nasty. So I remember one of the first people that met us, you take a ferry from leeward side to windward side, and someone said, well, welcome to the armpit of the Caribbean. And it just kind of like stuck with me. So I was like, cool, what a welcome. I'm so excited to be here in the armpit. And then it's hot. You see iguanas freely walking around. Crabs are crossing the roads. There's something called banana rats. So not only was it my first time being away from home, it's a whole new like culture shock. But at the time, it was a hardship tour, so no families were allowed. You were there for 1 year, and you lived in what was called like a TK. And I was put into a house with 7 other women, and we were all different ranks, and we had no choice but to figure it out. So if you can imagine, women of all ages, all backgrounds now being forced to be roommates. So that was also another shocker. So it was a tumultuous first couple of weeks, but.
Were you the youngest of that group at 18?
So I was lucky. One of the women that I was in basic training with, she was with me. She was 21. I was 18. So we were kind of the same age. But they were able to legally go drink alcohol.
So talk to me a bit about what your job was. What was your MOS there?
So being a 31 Echo, I worked in corrections. So our job was to provide custody and control for the detainees.
And what year was this?
2005. It was
2000.
July 2005 to 06 is when I was there.
Okay, so the detainees sort of started in 2002, as I was reading. That's sort of, there was a shift in Guantanamo at that time after 9/11. And I will say, like, there are probably things that I can't ask. And being a civilian myself, I probably may ask those, not knowing that I can't. So if I at any point during this program ask a question that you're like can't answer that, no problem. Just say next question and we can move on. And not a problem with that. Did you feel prepared from your basic training to be able to take care of detainees?
So to err on the side of caution, if there is something that I'm not sure of, I won't answer. But for the most part, I would say yes. At the time that I was in basic training, we were really digging into detainee ops. And I think the whole situation with Abu Ghraib was the catalyst that kind of sprung the focus on that. So OSIT stands for One Station Unit Training, for those who are unfamiliar. So usually there's a basic training portion, and then you leave and you go somewhere else for AIT. But we were doing it all at once. So it was 6 months of just kind of honing in on our skill, working with all MPs. So it was 31 Bravos and 31 Echoes together. So we got to, feed off of each other and learn, and, we got to role play. So we were detainees and then other people were corrections. At Fort Leonard Wood too, they had built little cities to mimic Iraq, to mimic these facilities and campsites. So I think that the Army did a really good job of preparing us for our job down there.
Excellent. What was, you'd say, over the course of that year that you were there, what was the biggest takeaway that you had?
So personally, and there might be a couple people on here, I got into my first bit of trouble in Guantanamo Bay. So, I got my first Article 15 down there. So personally, I had learned a lot about myself and how resilient I am and how serious I wanted to take my military career. And then professionally, I learned a lot from some really great NCOs, but the experience was not always the easiest. Being a woman, and, we would do what's called sanitizing your uniforms. And all that was putting a piece of tape over your name. And at the time, my last name was Weinstein. So not only did I have a Jewish last name, but I was a female. So once the detainees found out a little bit more of my background, they treated me worse than they were already treating me. So I would say on a weekly basis, I was having, body fluids thrown at me. So it just became a norm that, like, I bring a second uniform, you get hosed off in the Sally port and you're going back to work. So it was a weird kind of dynamic that you're going into a place and you're expecting to get poop thrown at you. So when that becomes like your everyday life, you're just like, okay, like, what is this? So it prepares you for other things. Like right now, I have 2 babies under 2. So when I get poop on me, I'm like, whatever, I've had way worse. So it's early. I learned, I think, a lot more than I would have had I not been sent to GITMO.
That's a really tough position to be in, especially after you join the Army. So like at that point, do you say, what did I do? Or, you come back and you stick with it? Like, how do you keep going in that situation? Because that would just be demoralizing, I would feel.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it depends on leadership. And they say, you learn a lot from poor leadership and you learn a lot from good leadership. But, the first time it happened, I was scared. I was crying. I didn't want to go back in there. You don't really have a choice in the military. I couldn't just go home. And where was home? You're away from your actual place that you grew up. So that's when you kind of have to rely on the people to the left and the right of you, and you have to, hone in on your training and trust that the drill sergeants and your instructors and your platoon sergeant and everybody has trained you and has your back. And I think that's the biggest part about being down there, is trusting the people to the left and right of you, because one wrong move, right? You're escorting a detainee or you're opening up their cell and the person you're with isn't paying attention or drops the key or didn't double lock the restraints. Your life is in their hands. So you're trusting that person. So at 18, you're also trusting the other 18-year-old. So if you think about your average 18-year-old today, and I think about me then, I cannot believe the situations that I was put in and the things that I was able to do.
Good point. Jeffrey, Fuel, I see you're shaking your head. I'd be interested. Don, you have your hand raised?
Yes, I do. Erica, thank you for serving in hard times down in Cuba. I just have a question. The indignities that you suffered from the detainees, did they face any punishment for that? Once your NCOs and the senior people realized you and your other soldiers were being treated so disrespectfully, was anything done to them, or were they just patted on the head and say, okay, go play some soccer?
No, so they're just like any facility, you would get rec taken away. So things like that. You would write a report. There were 509s. You would either get moved to solitary or to a different block. So there was never any congratulations, good job. There was always something. There was a disciplinary action. Yes.
So Jeffrey, yeah, I saw you shaking your head a lot with what Erica, and Erica, you sort of gave me a list of people. Hey, invite these. Jeffrey, you were one of those people that we reached out to after Erica sent me the list. Thank you for coming on and joining us here with VBC. But can you give me an idea of branch and years of service and when you were in GITMO?
I did 20 years active duty military police in corrections. I was in 31 Echo as well with Erica. I was a first sergeant down there in 2005 and through 2006. I was the HHC 525 MP Battalion first sergeant. So really familiar with what Erica went through. I'm in corrections now. I'm the warden here in Washington, Pennsylvania. I've been a warden for 15 years. So what she had to deal with was much greater than what would normally be faced in today's corrections environment. The detainees were not under UCMJ. They weren't under any kind of law. They couldn't be punished administratively, but very, very, they were already locked down. So the options of managing behavior in that environment were nil. And so Erica was, it was very much a hostile environment. And so the purpose of our mission down there was not detention. The purpose was intelligence. And so we, Eric and I didn't understand that. I didn't at the time, because they're not going to come out and say, okay, guys, ladies, we're here for intel purposes. We're gathering intelligence at your expense. They don't tell you that. So they tell you very little. And when you go down there, it takes all damn day to get down there. When you get down there, you hit the ground running, because the mission, there were, at the time, Erica had to deal with over 440 enemy combatants. And so it was a large population. We had 3 suicides in one night. And so there's a bunch of things, splashings were every day, a bunch of things that occurred that aren't normal in corrections that Erica had to face. Behavioral management doesn't work when you're talking about enemy combatants. And so we can't criminally charge these people. And again, the mission's not detention. The mission's intelligence. So we're secondary. And so it was very, very difficult.
Glenn?
Well, fascinated by the intelligence part. So were the two of you involved in gaining intelligence, or was that somebody else's job?
No. Yeah, we were not allowed to. That was our sandbox, was to provide basic human rights, chow, medical, security, shoot gun, eat chow, that's it. Anything outside of that, we were being watched. The whole place was bugged. Erica, your conversations were recorded. And so there was a military intelligence officer listening to your conversations. And so it was very, and we, of course, we didn't know that. Okay, CIA, NSA, Navy intelligence, Army intelligence, they're not going to tell you, oh, by the way, everything that you do is being analyzed. Your relationships are being analyzed. Your actions are being watched. And so it's all intel. The behavioral management piece was part of the intelligence mission. That's what went wrong in Abu Ghraib. Okay. That happened, some of that stuff unclassified happened in Guantanamo Bay. It just wasn't photographed. But the intel mission was alive and well. Some of it Erica knew about and me. Most of it we didn't. There's stuff that went on down there, Erica, that we found out later it was going on. We didn't know because we're not intel. And you guys know, unless you have a need to know, you're not going to know.
So you had to, Jeff, you had to stay pretty singularly focused on your own personal mission, like the mission you were given, right?
Yeah. I was in the PT track with Major Anderson, Vern Anderson, remember. I was on the PT track and I was with one of the civilian contractors. And I asked the guy, I said, come on, guys, are you really getting intel down here? I said, these guys have been here since 2002. It's 2005. I said, they've been here 3 years. I said, are you still getting good intel? He said, they've given us grid coordinates as late as last week, and we call the commander in the field and the stuff's there. So they were getting actionable intelligence as we were there. It was real. That's why, Guantanamo Bay, they said, we're going to shut it down. They'll never shut it down.
No, especially if you're getting actionable intelligence, especially accurate actionable intelligence, which
it's real. The contractors, as I was running PT, they said, yep, but we're getting it. And of course, no one knows about that stuff. You're not going to read about it in the newspaper. Eric and I certainly didn't know. Mm-hmm. I was the first one. I didn't know. All I was doing is shoot, gun, eat, chow. That's all we did was PT. Training.
That's what I was going to ask. Is like, so what was the daily life like for you?
PT training, watching the detainees. That's it. The detainees don't get squat.
And you did that every day for a year?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
7/12s, Erica, was it?
Sorry, if you end up muting, I'll ask you to unmute. That's just how we have it set up to cut down on extraneous noise.
Yeah. We worked 12-hour shifts, so we would either do PT or before or after. So that ended up being like 14 hours.
Yeah.
7
days a week, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the 8th day you got off.
Yeah, it was they call it a DA6, and then if somebody was sick or had to leave the facility because they got splashed, then you got called in. So then you'd be on standby. So yeah, it was a pretty grueling schedule.
Can you explain splashed? Does that mean poop thrown at you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
No, it doesn't happen in civilian corrections. I mean, once every 3 years, maybe, but down there it's all the time.
All the time. And to that piece about the intelligence part, we as the soldiers on the floor would get so angry because people would come in after somebody was assaulted or splashed with so I guess they would fly in from Florida with KFC or something for they would meet, and we didn't know what was going on, and we're like, are you kidding me? And then years later we find out it was part of the intel, was part of the the interrogation, like when a police officer brings you your cup of coffee before your lawyer gets there. It was those kinds of things that now years later made sense. But I was in E1 E2, my clearance was to just go there and escort,
Mm-hmm.
So not really understanding, we would be very angry.
They had a purple room inside Camp 5, velvet purple.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Interesting that they would fly in KFC because there is a McDonald's, I think, down there. And I'm going to ask if that's actually like legit McDonald's, like you go in there and tastes like you get down the street. Like,
Mhm.
pretty amazing.
It has McDonald's, I believe. Army has Burger King, which is horrible.
All right, so that's sort of like a within the last 18 to 20 years, sort of a snapshot, real quick. Let's jump back in time just a touch here. Just a quick history lesson that we acquired this area. I think it was 1898 after Spanish American War. The Platt Amendment in what was passed in Congress in 1901. This stated, and I quote here because I think it's important for us just to understand how we got this, that to enable the United States to maintain the independence of Cuba and to protect the people thereof, as well as for its own defense, the government of Cuba will sell or lease to the United States lands necessary for coaling or naval stations at certain specified points to be agreed upon with the United States. At that point, we were going to lease it. We were going to pay Cuba 2,000 gold coins in perpetuity. But in 1934, we changed that over to dollars. I guess we were sick of giving them gold coins. So we changed it over to the US dollar based on what the price of gold was at that time. So $3,386. I thought this was a fun little thing here. So in 1934, $3,386 was what it became. I'm going to throw a poll up real quick. If you see on your screen there, you have a couple seconds here to adjust it for inflation. If, and this is a funny thing, is that Cuba only once over the last, what is that, century and a quarter, only once have they cashed this check that the United States sends them for GITMO. And that was a mistake. So they've never cashed the check. So adjusting for inflation, if you see that poll on your screen, go ahead and answer, see what you think is the actual from 3,386 to 2023, what we would be paying them now every year. See the answers coming in hot and heavy here. We have 72 people in the room. 35%. Good. Very interesting. Interesting answers. In the Cold War, they placed 55,000 landmines around GITMO, not only the United States, but Cuba as well, around GITMO. And I think it was Clinton who said, we're going to remove those. So we removed the United States mines. Cuba kept theirs, and we put in different. Maybe somebody here can fill us in on sort of what surveillance we have around GITMO to make sure that it's nice and safe. We'll go ahead and end the poll here with the vast majority of people saying $100,876. And the correct answer is actually the least amount of people. That 2 people said 77,744. I calculated that on the internet, and the internet doesn't lie. So that's the answer. If we would be paying them $77,000 right now, if we would have kept with that original deal. So Pat, you mispronounce your last name, D'Amico?
D'Amico. Yeah.
D'Amico. Pat, I'm going to stop sharing here. Pat, we just got to do a really awesome Scuttlebutt podcast. Like I said, it's coming out next Monday. But in that podcast, you had mentioned that you were a Guantanamo Bay veteran from a different area. You said you had some stories. So I thought I'd ask, and you could give us sort of the background of, what was it, Army?
Yeah, so this is interesting hearing Erica and Jeff's feedback, because I may have some history that eventually connected. So I was a 95 Bravo, so military police officer, combat support unit. We were not a corrections unit. And after returning from Desert Storm in the middle of 1991, we turned around a few months later and were alerted that we were going to be deploying to Guantanamo Bay. And very quickly, within 2 weeks, there was no advance party. We had no idea what we were going to be doing there. What we did know at the time was that the Haitian migrant crisis had begun. And there was a court case in November of 91 that essentially one of the Haitian migrants that had sued won, which essentially said that the government could not repatriate them at that time until their cases were adjudicated. As a result of that, at the time, there was a 2,500, there was a cap of 2,500 Haitian migrants that could be held at Guantanamo Bay, and that cap had been lifted. So we flew into, as a company at the time, we were with I was at the 437th MP company, I was a platoon leader. So we flew into Guantanamo Bay. I don't know if anybody else here, I really would love to know. Our entire company of 4 platoons stayed in the bomb shelters. The entire platoon stayed in one bomb shelter. I don't know if anybody even knew those existed, but I had 30 guys staying in one bomb shelter. It was infested with tarantulas. So I had a couple folks that were little spooked, and they slept outside actually. But it was this weird area. You could walk to the gym from there. I remember that. But so we got settled in the bomb shelters, and they drove the 5 of us, the 4 platoon leaders and our company commander, out in the evening. We arrived at the old airfield, which at the time was no longer in use. And they drove us out, and we walked in the hangar, and there were roughly, I don't know, maybe 600 or 700 cots inside the hangar. And they said, within the next couple days, this is going to be filled. And then they walked us outside, and they said, and over the next month, there will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 to 10,000 Haitian migrants on this airfield. And I will tell you that it was my first deployment working with the Navy. Didn't know who the Seabees were, but couldn't have more respect. My father was sort of a civilian Seabee construction guy. And so I will tell you that I never saw anybody work as hard and build a camp so quickly. So over the course of the next 2 weeks, we turned an empty airfield into a migrant camp. And at the time, we had the camp separated into single males. We had one camp for single males. We had one camp for single females, and we had one camp for families. And within 2 weeks, we began receiving hundreds and then thousands of Haitian migrants at this airfield. We worked a lot with Civil Affairs was on site at the time. General Walls, who was a Marine general, was the commander of Guantanamo Bay. Interesting gentleman. And we began what was the first isolated detention camp, which was a little bit away from the airfield. And the detention camp consisted of a 10 by 10 square of concrete surrounded by a fence, and we would isolate. Those were the first isolated prisoners, more or less, right? We didn't call them prisoners at the time, but one of the problems we had with the Haitian migrants was they were fairly organized from a criminal gang activity standpoint. So the Civil Affairs group, and we had some CIA folks on site, spent most of their day on the roof with binoculars, trying to identify and get pictures. So we knew who these folks were. We could try to identify them. We had a violent riot in one of the camps where the migrants actually took over the camp. And in a brilliant move, I still remember this general, they had not only taken over the camp, but they destroyed all the cots and everything inside the camp. So we essentially secured them within the camp, and it rained that night, which it didn't seem to do often, and it just poured. And General Walls came out with a megaphone and essentially said, if this is the thanks we get, you can now suffer for that. And then 2 days later, after not feeding them, we gave them a massive turkey dinner. And that evening, as the majority of them slept and had their primitive walkie-talkies, and they were, their communication methods, we actually stormed the camp and took over the camp. But that was the time. So we were doing this, similar, Eric, as what you mentioned. We were doing, 12-hour shifts a day of camp security. My biggest probably complaint, and the thing that bothered me the most, the single situation that bothered me the most about GITMO was a crew from Newsweek came to visit camp, and we were patrolling the insides of these camps without firearms. It was essentially MPs with batons, and we, generally speaking, didn't have any difficulty. But keep in mind, when you build a camp that quickly, you use the materials that are available, and unfortunately, like it or not, they were fences and concertina wire, and that's what the camps were built with. But everyone had tents and cots and porta potties and all that. And when the Newsweek crew came to do the story, I was responsible for camp security during that 12-hour shift, and they were attempting to take photos that made it look as if they were prisoners. And so I kept telling my patrol MPs to move in the picture, which was being taken from outside of the concertina wire and got into a big argument. Eventually the UN representative who was in charge came up and told me to remove my folks from the camp, and I was pretty ticked because I'm like, this is really giving the wrong impression. And those were the pictures that showed up in Newsweek, which essentially made it look like they were prisoners in the camp. But that was my experience in Guantanamo Bay. Not the worst duty I had, not the worst deployment I think that I had. They had a great gym. I remember that, and the weather was decent. So there were some, but I do remember having to live with my entire platoon in one bomb shelter that was infested with tarantulas. So that was kind of an interesting piece. But yeah, that's how we spent our time there. Yeah, there it is.
I thought so. I wanted to bring that up. So you give us an idea.
Yeah. So at the about the middle, just a little to the upper left of the center, right? That's the hangar. So we did house some migrants there. This is a much later picture, to be frank, than when I was there, because it did not look that organized as this appears. And, had I been home, and I apologize, we're in Florida visiting for the weekend, I do have some pretty interesting photos that I took, and also I journal. I did a lot of journaling back in those days, so I've got some interesting pieces of information. But Erica, real quickly, to your story about the Article 15, we had some soldiers that got really ragingly drunk at the NCO club one night, and we were concerned about their behavior. And we had never been deployed under the command of a Marine officer, Marine general, like I said, General Walls. So my company commander went on his own the next morning to see General Walls to essentially get ahead of this and apologize. And General Walls looked at him and said, they were just blowing off steam. I don't even know why you're here. So I did appreciate that.
Very lucky. But that's where I got in trouble, was the NCO club. Should not have been there. Underage drinking. But again, there was very little.
There was a lot to do there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did they have did they have the outdoor movie theater then as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they used to have that.
Thank you so much, Pat. Stick with us here, and please keep engaging and asking questions. I asked Dennis Thompson to unmute. Dennis, you had emailed Todd and said you were at Guantanamo Bay during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And
Correct.
I mean, the main question is, tell us what was it like there? Because obviously that was one of the closest we've ever come to, nuclear war.
1962.
Mm-hmm.
And my permanent duty station was, Camp Lejeune, and we were on temporary duty assignment down there. And we lived in the barracks and everything, but then we'd go up on the mountains and we would dig the trench line, build the foxholes and the pillboxes and everything. And I can remember in those days, I wasn't, I'm a retired minister now, but when I was in the Marine Corps, now we were on the windward side, and there's the windward side and the leeward side. And I think we were on the other side over there, Sean. I'm not sure just.
I think I'm circling on the right. There's the windward point, and on the left, there's the leeward point.
Okay, we were at leeward. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
But at any rate, we were up there, and it was October, around the 21st or something like that. And we were up on duty at night, and we guarded the fence line and everything. We didn't have any ammunition. One time during the day, though, we were by the fence, and we started talking to the Cuban soldiers because the guy that I was on duty with could speak their language. And so he was talking to them, and then he'd tell me what they were saying. They said, "We don't want to fight with you guys. This is Castro that's making us do this." And I'll tell you what, their uniforms and their rifles looked like junk. I mean, it was terrible. Their uniforms almost looked like rags. But at any rate, we're up on the hill the one night, and all of a sudden we hear somebody else coming. And we were in the headquarters and support. I was with the 106 anti-tank weapon. and carried the 45. We did have the M1s back there at that time. Well, we might have been over the M14 by then, but at any rate, here the guys are coming up on. We said, "What are you doing?" Well, there's some 4-star general wants to inspect the troops, and he wants to do it here in the trench lines. And to make it more realistic, we're giving out real ammunition to everybody. We were supposed to invade at midnight. They didn't want to tell us, but they didn't want a bunch of us getting, trigger happy or getting all shook up or anything. And so I think the order came in from Kennedy, was president at the time. I think it come in a couple minutes to midnight to stand down. So when it started getting daylight the next morning, we can see Guantanamo Bay. It was loaded with naval ships. Where'd those guys come from? They must have come in at night under low light and everything. We didn't even know they were down there. And then as it got more daylight, airplanes started landing on the runway and bringing in more ammunition, more troops, equipment to go into war. And they told us then the next day, you guys, we were supposed to invade at midnight last night. That's why we gave the live ammunition out to you. And we stayed up there for 21 days. Then they would take us down for 3 days of R&R, and we'd go to the slop chute and get a beer or get a pizza or something, and sleep in our own bunks in the barracks that we had there for the 3 days. Then we went back up and we stayed up there another 21 days. Then we came back down 3 days of R&R. Then we went back up, but we didn't stay 21 days this time. We came back down, we packed up our stuff, got on a nice naval ship, and took us back to the States. I think we would go into Morehead City, is where they take us in, and then they take us up to, Camp Lejeune and go back to our regular barracks and everything. But it was kind of interesting down there in the 21 days. And somebody was saying about scorpions. I was sitting with my feet hanging down in the trench line, sitting on the side, blistering hot. And all of a sudden I felt something on my stomach over here to the right. And I grabbed it and I looked, and here I smashed a scorpion in my hand, but he had already bit me. That thing started swelling up. They said, you better go to sick bay. They gave me some kind of injection they said, good thing you're a little on the heavy side. You'd have been skinnier, you probably would have been dead. I said, well, I didn't like that, but we didn't like the scorpions, but we keep watch for everybody at night and everything, and very uncomfortable to sleep in those trench lines and those pillboxes and foxholes that we built for ourselves. And the one pillbox we was in, young lady, you close your ears right now. We had up on the roof inside, we have Playboy magazines pinned up there so we can look up and see them,
They're probably still there.
They might be. Now remember, I was in 60. I went in September 61 into the Corps, and I got out in 64, 65. No, 64. Then I met my wife on October. I got out in September, met my wife October the 15th down here at the Beaver High School. They were having a football game, and I met her there at the football stadium. And I asked her 4 days later to marry me. And we were married October the 15th, a year later. And we've been married 57 years.
Hey, congrats.
Have 2 kids and 3 grandkids.
Wonderful.
But I love my time in the Corps.
Yeah.
In fact, I was wanting to be a drill instructor, and go down there and thump on heads like they used to do to us. But that didn't happen. But I served my 4 years and got out. But
would you say that was the tensest time of your 4 years in? Was that those couple days, those 21 days?
Well, yeah, when they told us what was going on then and realized that we were about ready to go to war. And, when they said we were supposed to invade at midnight, they even gave us these big bolt cutters so we could cut the chain link fence to go in. But I don't know if we'd have went in, what would have really happened, because where was that kind of mountainous area right there? And that was, now somebody was talking about intelligence. I had another duty station and we had a secure room, and I had a top secret clearance. And when I left there, I had to sign papers that I would never say what was in that room, what we saw in that room, what we did in that room. Somebody said, "Oh, that was a long time ago." I signed the papers that I'd never talk about it, and that's as much as I say about it. My wife was. I said, "I can't tell you." I signed
Erica,
it
is that-
and said I would never divulge what I did and what I saw in there when I had the top secret clearance.
Erica, is that the same as it is now? Like, are there things you have to sign to say you won't talk about these certain pieces of it?
No, I haven't had to re-sign it.
Well, I'm asking Erica
Figure once
specifically.
is good enough.
Yeah, definitely. And you get OPSEC briefs all the time, OPSEC being Operation Security. The more, I don't remember, maybe because it was so long ago, exactly like the situation in which, but when I was in Iraq, something similar, I worked with some Delta guys, and the same thing. It was, I don't even know if there's a time limit. I just feel like it's safer just not to say anything about it.
Right.
Right.
Like one other thing, Sean, somebody had mentioned Seabees. They would go down to the slop chute and get soda, Pepsi, Coke, all that kind of stuff. And I think at that time we could get it for like 25 cents a can. And when the Seabees came up, they had a big trash can full of ice and all kind of sodas. They said, "You guys want a soda?" And they told us what 25 cents is what, I think that's what we paid for it down at the slop chute. Might have been, it's been like she said, 1962. I'll be 80 on my next birthday in March. So memory starts to fade a little bit.
Ben, right, I unmuted you. You had said in the chat that you flew in and out of Guantanamo Bay in the late 1970s. We've heard sort of people say throughout here that getting down there is quite difficult. What was your experience flying in and out?
Well, it was interesting. I was on Howard Air Force Base in the Panama Canal Zone, and they gave me another mission to take a USO show into Guantanamo Bay. And so, of course, coming from the south, from Panama, it's pretty easy to stay out of Cuban airspace, which was the thing. So you approach the airfield from the south. And the goal was to land to the west. And that, if you looked at that map you showed, that leeward side airfield, it's not very far from the end of that runway until you would be in Cuban airspace. So you'd want to land to the west and take off to the east unless the winds prohibited that. And, so it was a big emphasis on stay out of Cuban airspace. And there were procedures to go with that. In fact, at that time, it was Military Airlift Command. Now it's Air Mobility Command. But they probably still have airfields today that you can't go there unless you've been there before. You went with somebody that had been before and get checked out on that airfield. But they gave me a waiver, decided I had enough experience to go in there, and you read up all the information in the flight information publications. The interesting thing was when you landed there, you got ready to file a flight plan. They had a teletype to Roosevelt Roads Naval Station in Puerto Rico. And so they would send your flight plan by teletype, but you couldn't get your instrument clearance or anything like that until you were after airborne because they didn't have the communications to get it. They probably have it now with satellite communications. So we would take off under visual conditions and actually pick up our clearance. And then we, flew to the south and you stayed out of Cuban airspace until you could turn north. I actually went from there to Charleston Air Force Base, South Carolina. But it was just an interesting thing to go in and out of there and the procedures and staying out of Cuban airspace. And we got to see a little bit of Guantanamo Bay, but not much.
Is it pretty up from the air? I mean, hearing a lot about, like, when, as a civilian, I imagine Guantanamo Bay, more sort of naval base, a prison. I don't imagine it being sort of this. I've also been down to the Yucatan Peninsula, and it's a gorgeous, beautiful tropical area. Is that the same as this? Is it?
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. I mean, it's a Caribbean island,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not all that far south of of Florida. So it's a typical Caribbean island. And so, yeah, it's pretty lush looking from the air.
Mm-hmm. And I'm interested, anybody here, we'll be kind of bouncing around the room, but this perimeter, I'm guessing this is where, as I mentioned earlier, the sort of 55,000 mines were placed. I'm intrigued by what the border is like. We heard a bit about that from Dennis. But even, is there commerce that comes through this channel into the bay up into actual Cuba? And is that controlled by the United States? A couple questions I have. So anybody who have answers for that, we'll get to them. Glenn, you have your hand up.
Well, no, you hit exactly, we think alike here, Sean. Great minds. I was wondering, are there Cuban soldiers surrounding the perimeter? There's 50,000 mines, I just heard you say, but are there active Cuban military operations anywhere near the perimeter?
Chuck Burrow?
Ground force defense communications, and we also had the security around the fence line. We were on the windward side, and at the shortest point between leeward and windward, there would be an outpost on each side. And in that outpost, whoever was guarding there, any ship that would come through, they had to take the measurement of the level of that ship floating in the water. There is a water line on the ship, and mostly what's the red portion is underneath. And they'll go in, and you can't see that red line. But when they come out, you will see the red line because they're moving. And probably, let's see.
I'm having a bit of audio issues from you, Chuck. Hopefully that clears up if anybody else is having trouble hearing Chuck, but keep going, Chuck.
Couldn't understand what he was saying.
Anyway, it was something similar to the, let's go right about here. Post number 20, post 21. And they would monitor the ships coming in.
Okay.
So, and they would go this way, and then, depending on how high they're sitting in the water or not. But other than that, yeah, around where I was, all the way around, there were bunkers, and there were mountains.
Bunkers and mountains?
What's that?
Bunkers and mountains. If you could speak up just a bit into your mic, we'll be able to hear you a little better.
Okay. Yes, there were bunkers and mountains, and the highest one was called Loma Pacote. And at the top of Loma Pacote was an outpost for the Cubans. So about every third day, there was this little particular Marine that would hover regularly on them at 5:30 in the morning, just to make sure there were people still up there. So he would make noise and bang on the top of this tin roof, and then everything would light up. They'd come out with their guns and all this stuff and say, "Good morning," one of those types of stuff. So he kept them on their toes. But yeah, there's all kinds of bunkers around through here. As a matter of fact, when I was there, we had to rebuild 93 of them around that area, from 21 to area number post 21 to 36, I believe. That was around there, around the fence line itself.
Okay. Pat, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, so when I was there, most nights the Marine aircraft would light up, would antagonize and throw a lot of flares and shoot a lot of flares at the fence line up in the air. So every night it was really interesting to watch, because the planes would, they would just drop flares, just to antagonize the Cuban side.
Oh yeah.
That's asking for it. That's like demilitarized zone.
Yeah. Yes.
Hey, Sean,
yes, Dennis.
When I was over there, heard the guys talking about Ben flying and everything. We were so high up on the mountain down there, the recon plane after that started, when we knew why we were there then. Every morning the recon plane would come and they were taking photographs. They'd fly along the fence line. And we would look down and we'd salute him as he'd come from our right across to our left. And of course he wouldn't sleep, but he'd tilt his wings like this at us. And every morning, like clockwork, I don't remember what time it was, they would fly across there and they were taking, video, or and I don't know if it was video at that time or just pictures, what was going on. And we used to watch the guys come in the trucks and change guards, and new guards would come on and other guards, and they would ride in a truck along the fence line. And us idiots picked up a bunch of good sized rocks. And when we were in our truck and they were taking us, we were up a little bit higher than them in the one spot. And we'd lob these rocks over on the Cuban soldiers. They'd bounce it off their helmets and everything. And all of a sudden, in the truck we were in, to come to a screeching halt, the sergeant dumped out of the passenger door. Said, "What are you guys trying to do? Start a war?" And we were bouncing rocks off these guys' head, and they probably had live ammunition like we did. They would turn around and shoot at him. He was not happy with us for throwing rocks at him. But
Glenn, it sounds like we've come closer to World War III simply because we have a bunch of bored 18-year-olds walking the border.
Well, all I can think about, Sean, every time we start talking about Guantanamo Bay is that movie, A Few Good Men. It just keeps ringing in my ears, I have a question. I don't know if there's any veterans on that have been in Guantanamo Bay, say in the last 5 or 10 years. But while we were talking, I looked up, I was wondering how many detainees there are now. And the answer seems to be 30.
Rich, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, I was the inspector general down there from 2007 through 2008. I could talk for 2 hours about this stuff. But yeah, there's 30 down there now.
There are 780 in total.
Right. In total.
And now only 30. So I'd love to hear your view of that. It went from very high to very low, and there was a flow in and flow out. And what's happened?
Well, if we're going to cap this in an hour, I suggest you have another meeting
Part
on
two?
this subject, because I know Wayne Wicks was a CT down there. As a matter of fact, the Cubans used to work on the base. Some of you old timers did open up the Northeast Gate, did bus Cubans to the base, and did work there. In 1962, when the Cuban Missile Crisis hit, Castro said anyone that has a visa or papers to work on the base can continue to work on the base, but he wasn't going to issue any new work orders for any new people to work on the base. So the last two people would have a bus that would go up. The Cubans would open up the Northeast Gate on their side. The Marines would open up the gate on our side for this old married couple to come across and work on the base. And when they died, that was it. That I don't want to steal anyone else's time, but like I said, I did 39 years in the Navy, and I was the IG down there. And Eric didn't talk about was, I don't know if you guys did, whoever worked as guards over at the base, what they do would be super hot. So in addition to the training they went through before they went down there, it would be super hot. So what they did, they got them out on the outdoor basketball court, which was asphalt. So you have heat radiating up from there, and you have stations, and you have other soldiers. And for guys that play football, you know how you have the pads you put on your arms? So you had these different stations. So they'd take all the guards and then spray them in the face with pepper spray. And there'd be snot coming out of their noses. There'd be, salivating. They couldn't see. And they'd have to kick the crap out of these guards, simulating that if the prisoners ever got the pepper spray off them, they'd have to fight their way out. So that's something else the guards had to go through. But they had to do mouth sweeps and all kinds of stuff. I could go on for a long time, but yeah, 30. And Cuban civilians did used to work there. Just a couple items of interest. In the United States, the average cost for a prisoner in a maximum security prison is $70,000 a year. Down in Guantanamo, it's between $800,000 and $1 million a year. So wow. It's very expensive. Just to make a gallon of fresh water, because Castro cut the fresh water line, so they use reverse osmosis down there, just like on the ships, to make fresh water. It takes 4 gallons of diesel fuel to make 1 gallon of fresh water. So you can imagine how much that costs. But anyway, I could keep going, but I'll cut it off there. But if you want to talk about getting no more, and like I said, Wayne Wicks is on. He was a CT. I could tell you about the intelligence down there, how we used it in real time, because there's just not enough time with this forum to discuss.
Let me
all
ask this
that.
question. I mean, clearly there was intelligence, as was talked about early on in this program, that was actionable, back in 2005, 7, 8. Is there still, I mean, when did that run out at some point? And
No,
is that
no.
still happening?
When I was down there, you had civilians down there. You have a whole intel department up there. And those were guys who were back in Vietnam, where to get intel off people that take a UE load that take maybe 5 guys up in a UE. They won't ask any questions. You just throw the first guy out of the helicopter, and the others watch him fall to his death. Say, now who's going to start talking? That type of stuff. So I could tell you about how we collected intel, and it wasn't waterboarding, it wasn't torturing, it was by other very nice means that we got some very good intel.
Bringing them
Erica,
KFC.
go ahead.
No, I was
Erica.
gonna say,
Yeah, other than Kentucky Fried Chicken, it seems to be the,
Oh yeah,
the
yeah,
golden
that
ticket.
stuff like that. She's right. Absolutely. Would have, like the women in the Arabic world, the women has always walked behind the guys, right? I don't know how it was with you, Erica, but we always made the lady guards walk in front of them just to piss them off, to let them know that they weren't in Kansas anymore. Stuff like that.
Erica, you had your hand raised?
I was just gonna say, so my husband was in Guantanamo Bay in 2020, and he is on the JAG side. So he was a BJA, and I just asked him how many detainees. He said there were 30-ish and more left after he left. But the intel stuff is still very much happening.
Well, we'd have Hamdan there, and Hamdan was actually bin Laden's driver. And we'd bring him in and have Hamdan tell us, because he knew everybody that met with bin Laden. So we'd have Hamdan in with a two-way mirror, okay? And he'd ID these guys, and he'd tell us who they were and everything else. And so we already had their bio on them before they opened their mouths.
Russell, did I just see you wave your hand, Russell Knight?
Yes, I'm going back to Dennis Thompson when he said about the Cubans coming into the base.
Yes.
I was stationed there 72 to 73, and I used to go my first couple of months there. I was like a taxi driver and bus driver, and we would still go out to the bases, out to the gates, and pick them up and bring them back, and then at the end of the day send them back out. And that was in 72 to 73.
Same thing in 71, 72.
Chuck was there 71, 72.
Yeah, that's what I was.
And Rich, you brought up Wayne. Wayne, I asked you to unmute. Hold on, I'm going to bring up a picture here for Wayne. Let me wait 1 second here. And you sent me a picture, Wayne. Can you explain? Yes.
I was a communications technician, and I was stationed in Guantanamo from November of 67 to November of 68. And I had a top secret crypto clearance, and that is a KW-26 crypto gear, a transmitter and receiver. At that time, it was classified secret, and it is now declassified. And that's in the CT, the Cryptologic Museum on Pensacola Naval Base. And I took that picture in 2015 when I visited Pensacola. And I was stationed there, and we were in the old World War II barracks, and 4 guys to a cube. It was really a cube, an open hallway, just a partition, and 4 guys to a cube. And yeah, I was there for a year, and that's equipment was the reason I was sent there.
What was your tour like?
I was married at the time, and I got married, and 3 days later I got a draft notice, and 26 days later I was in the Naval Reserve. And I got into reserve because I had 9 months of school to finish, and they gave me a year to finish. And by the way, in World War II, there were 3 million people in the Navy and 2.6 million were reservists because someone figured out we couldn't support all 3 million when the war was over. So anyhow, the reserves played a big part. Anyhow, it was tough because we had to depend on mail coming in to communicate with your family at home, or the other way was through ham operators. And that was kind of fun because I had a first class petty officer who was a ham operator, and he would get a connection up here in the States. And then that person would call my wife, and you'd be talking and you go over and everybody could hear what you were saying. So yeah, but we got through it month by month. So
Rich, I'm sure that was a lot different than your way to communicate back home.
I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, we had a pretty nice.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they have a Subway down there. They have McDonald's. They actually have an Irish pub there with dark wood paneling, the CO base. The key to remember, there's two sides of that base. You have the Joint Task Force side where the detainees are, and you have the naval station side. You know, and it used to be a lot different. You used to have fleet training group down there where all the ships, after we went through overhaul, went down and went under refresher training. You used to have SIMAs down there that did ship repair. And now that's gone. SIMA's gone. Fleet training group has gone down there. It's still our only strategic footprint in the Caribbean, especially since they shut down Rosie Roads down in Puerto Rico. They shut that down, so we no longer have a base there. But like I said, I could go in a lot more detail about Guantanamo, current day, and even the past. It's the only base we have in a communist country, and it's our oldest overseas base.
So what I find interesting is there's so roughly 8,500 personnel there, mostly Navy and Marines. So you think about an aircraft carrier has about 5,000 ish people. It's a floating city. So you have an entire city. The infrastructure there in Guantanamo has to be able to support itself, but also getting in supplies and different things from the States. And what I find really interesting is earlier someone said it was all need to know basis. So how many of you, you had your job, but how much did you know about what else was going on in this city that was that was operating down there?
I know everything. I was the inspector general.
You were the person that needed to know everything.
That's right. I told the admiral everything that was going on.
So was it different on the between the two different points that were there? The the leeward side and the other side? Was it very different?
First of all, I was an officer. I was a commander down there. And the Army people did have it a lot rougher. I mean, they did 12-hour shifts. And during Ramadan, they had it rough because I don't know. I mean, when I was there, I don't know what it was like before that. The guards used to carry Ramadan cards on what you were and were not allowed to do. You were not allowed to chew gum in front of the detainees because they were fasting. You weren't allowed to drink water in front of them because they were fasting. Okay. Now I'm Catholic, so when you fast during Lent, you fast. But during Ramadan, you fast during the daylight hours, then you gorge yourself like pigs, in the evening when the sun goes down. And but here again, I could talk a long time. You almost need to have a follow-up meeting on that. But so I lived up in Windward Loop. Windward Loop, we lived in houses. Okay, so I lived with the Navy dentist, and just to show you how terrorists think, we had one high-value detainee. The dentist got called out. My roommate got called out because he had an abscessed tooth. So he got called out in the middle of the night. So I talked to him the next morning. He says, "You won't believe what happened last night." I says, "What?" He says, "Well, I went in this morning to check to see how the detainee was doing. He's got within 2 inches of his face, but they'll never attack you. If they do, we have what's called FSEs, or FCEs, 4-cell extraction guys. They're like SWAT guys. They'll jump all over you." He says, "I just want to thank you. I feel much better now, but know this, the day I get out of here, I'm going to kill you and your whole family."
Oh, man.
Wow.
Peggy, you put something very interesting in the chat, a story about you and your family posting down by the Department of State in 94, 97.
Yes, my husband was the regional security officer at USINT, Havana, Cuba. And now it's an embassy, but back then it was United States intersection. We were under the embassy of Switzerland, and there were probably 4 or 5 Swiss diplomats, many, many more US diplomats. Relations, a lot of people say, what, you were in Cuba? But Jimmy Carter signed some agreement in 1978 so that there was a US intersection in Havana. There was a Cuban intersection in DC under, I think, another country. So it was a hardship tour for us, but we ended up staying, instead of 2 years, 3 years. It was much better than the 2.5 years we were in Bucharest, Romania in the 80s. That was a lot harder. We knew we would be followed. House was bugged, but in Cuba, people talk to you, you could talk to them, and everyone loved to talk. And my husband thought it would be great to see the whole island of Cuba. And our 2 sons came down for the last summer. One was in college, one was in boarding school. So we rented a Havana tour convertible van, and we drove all around the country. Havana is probably 600 miles from GITMO, different climate, totally. Havana's like Miami, nice breeze. When we were down by GITMO, it was hot, just hot. And at the time in June, there was a really bad rainstorm. So some of the roads we got on, we had to get off because they just disappeared. But we stopped at this one hotel in the province of Guantanamo, and this waiter came up and he spoke perfect US English. And so, we're talking to him, and we said, gee, how do you know this English so well? And all he said was, I listened to the Armed Forces radio network from GITMO. But we did not see GITMO. We saw the sign for the province, but we were in that area. And another funny thing, at the time, I was the community liaison officer at the intersection, and we'd get new people going to Cuba, and they wanted to know what was going on. And this one guy called from the States, and the first thing he said was, well, do we get to go to the PX at GITMO? And I said, we are 600 miles from GITMO. There's no way that you go there from Havana. And our way to get to Havana and back to the States was usually a chartered flight from Miami International Airport. You'd check in at 5 o'clock in the morning, and you'd sit around, and then get on a flight, and 40 minutes later you were in Havana. And at one time while we were there was the shoot down of the Brothers to the Rescue planes. And these were planes that had thrown flyers out for quite a while in Havana. And at this particular time, the Cubans shot down one plane. So the regular flights between Miami and Havana were canceled. So we had to fly from Havana to Cancun and then to the States. And at the time, our younger son, he was sort of harassed by customs in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the customs guy said, gee, you should be coming in from Miami. What are you doing coming in this way? And this is a kid, 17 years old. He's got his diplomatic passport, his orders. He just, was very polite. And I'm telling the story because his first job out of college was with US Customs. And in high school, he wrote in his yearbook, he wanted to thank Fidel Castro and and the customs for a very interesting experience.
Well, I'm sure you had, it sounds like a very interesting and very unique experience to be able to work at the intersection.
Yes, yes, I'm glad I had a top secret clearance. I got to go to country team meetings and see what sometimes my husband had to go through for a lot of things. But I always, it wasn't for that year in Vietnam that I was able to do all these other things.
Incredible. Erica, I'm going to ask you to explain this, because in my research, I sort of found out about this. Was the cactus curtain? Is it still called that?
We never referred to it as that, but that is a very common scenery. And I also wanted to note, so it's very beautiful. So somebody said the aerial, it's the Caribbean, but the beaches are pebbles, like rocks. So there's no sand. So if you wanted to go into the water and actually enjoy yourself, you had to wear shoes. This sounds ridiculous, like complaining about that, but it's just, fun facts of people who are unable to ever go there. It's just very, very rocky, and there's only certain beaches that you are allowed access to, and they're not like you would think. So I'm from Philadelphia, and we think of the Jersey Shore. It's not like that. Yes, exactly. You have to like trudge down like big rocks, and then there's like a table. Actually, right there looks like it might be Windmill Beach. I'm not really sure. But there's another one called Glass Beach, and it's like a big metal ladder that's probably never been inspected for 100 years that you climb down. And there's a lot of sea glass. So that's how I got the nickname Glass Beach. And then you could also, one of the maps you had up showed Hospital K. You could rent, we made friends with the Navy guys, because Navy guys had a very cool cush schedule, and they could do fun things and go scuba diving. So the one time that we would get off, we would latch on to the Navy guys who also had cars down there, and they would rent pontoon boats. And I remember going out to Hospital K at night, and your skin actually would glow in the water. That was pretty cool.
I was not expecting tonight to come on and hear stories about like these sort of adventures that you have as well. Like there obviously hardship, obviously growing and difficult things that like detainees, different things. Definitely was not expecting like, but you also have this time with your, the servicemen and women that were surrounding you, and like, not only just drinking at the NCO club, which I guess you don't do ever, but going to beautiful spots and sort of taking in the sights of Guantanamo Bay.
It's Club Med down there.
Well, I'll say, Rich, you had mentioned that you lived.
Perfectly.
So Windward Loop was one of our PT routes. So there's Windward Loop from the TKs was a couple of miles, and then we would also run what was called the Ridge. And whenever it was at Ridge Run, you knew you were going to die. So it's literally what it is. You ran the ridge, but you could see pretty much most of the island. And then there was another road that we would run all the way up to Camp X-Ray, which is kind of just like dead now. There's nothing really out there, and turn around and come back. A couple of guys I know recently that I served with, I was hoping that they would come on. They didn't, that are still in, were just there. And Strava, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the app, got banned because it was pulling in direct satellite location for people that were in Guantanamo, and kind of it was breaking OPSEC. That's a little fun fact.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have another picture I want to show. Hopefully somebody, it's sort of another sort of pop quiz here, which I found very interesting. Does anyone know what this is? Wayne?
Wayne,
Yeah.
you served on that, didn't you?
Wayne, you said.
No, I wasn't on that ship. My buddy Bud Brock was, but not me.
This is the USS Monongahela, which, if you're a Pittsburgher, one of our rivers is the Monongahela. This was in service, obviously, like before the 1900s, but it was actually on display. There was a shop on it in Guantanamo, but in 1908 there was a fire on it, and maybe this term will ring somebody's bell here. Is Old Droopy? No? Okay, supposedly that one of the 4-inch guns on this ship was in the fire and drooped, and is still on display down there. That is also from the internet, and I'm hoping, like I said, the internet doesn't lie. So I don't know if
Yeah.
Old Droopy was something that everybody knew about, or is that just something like a tourist attraction down there?
No, that ship actually burned, and the outlines like the Arizona. You can see the outline where it caught on fire and sank, where the wood still is.
Interesting.
And
And
by the way, you were right about the cactus fence. Castro had a cactus fence built, and it was similar like to the hedgerows in Normandy that the tanks couldn't even get through. You don't need razor wire. That wall of cactus, you'll never get through it.
I
It
thought
wasn't
another
like the one you showed. This was solid.
there's like a solid wall of cactuses.
Right.
There's also, can't fail to mention, banana rats. So I don't know if Pat, when you were down there, if you experienced these creatures, just, and you could hear them at night. So yeah.
Yeah,
What is
they
a
were really
banana rat?
loud. Well, they sounded almost like a monkey, almost, right? But you just had you had a lot of animals in that you just weren't used to seeing, right? There was just a lot of oddities between the iguanas, which were everywhere. Which of all the places I've traveled throughout the Caribbean, I never saw as many. There you go.
Yeah.
I never saw I never saw as many colorful iguanas anywhere else since as when I was in Cuba. But yeah, they're some sort of rodent family, I gather. But yeah,
Are they hostile?
They're not
No.
friendly, but they're not. I mean, there ended up being like a ban, like soldiers were trying to trap them, and then there was this whole thing like, do not trap the banana rats. And
no, we didn't know. We didn't experiment with that. I had a lot of people trying to trap the tarantulas and put them in each other because I should mention that the tarantulas were not, at least when none of them were poisonous. So they were just intimidating. But I mean, people learn who's afraid of them, and they catch them. They put them in their sleeping bag or whatever. So yeah.
Sean, this is just stuff, soldiers, sailors, people find
Things to do.
Yeah.
Things to do.
Well,
Yeah.
there's a
Hey,
curator. Every year they have a reptile show that was put on. Maybe when you weren't there, but actually there's a curator for Guantanamo. He's the curator of the Akron Zoo, and he comes down, and they have like over 10-foot long boa constrictors down there because they eat these banana rats. And every year it put on a reptile show, and it had different snakes. He pulled out one boa. It took 5 guys from the head to the tail to hold it up, and he puts microchips in them. And he comes down every year and checks the health of them and everything else. So yeah, there's some pretty big snakes down there too.
Yeah.
So were there USO shows that came down through there? Like,
We had the Victoria's Secret models down there.
No, we didn't have any of that.
We didn't have that. Yeah,
Oh,
right. Just to be
yeah.
clear.
We got once in a while an outdoor movie would play, and they would let everybody go see a movie. That was about the extent.
Okay, now let me ask you, at the movie theater where you had the bleachers outside and the big screen, right?
Yeah.
Remember all the bats flying in front of the screen because the lights would attract all the bugs, and the big bats with like 4-foot long wingspans would fly in front of the screen while you're trying to watch a movie?
That was just anywhere too on Camp America. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they picked the movies. Now that I'm thinking about it, I hadn't thought about it since, but I distinctly remember they showed 9.5 weeks. Now let's be honest. You're on a deployment, and that's the movie they picked. So somebody had a bad sense of humor.
But yeah, there's tons to do down there. Honestly, now the Army, I'll give you ladies and guys credit. You work your butts off. The Navy, not so much as usual.
Well, there was a
It was like
pool.
McHale's
We were able to go to the pool. I do remember that, and that was nice because it was as was mentioned, it was just hot there. It was just hot all the time.
Yeah.
Well, they have Ocean Enterprises dive shop down there. There's actually a dive shop. You can buy tanks and scuba gear. I mean, it's beautiful going scuba diving down there. You have fishing poles. So yeah, we had a good time at your expense.
It's funny.
Yeah, no, and no to any of that. Yeah, no. I dove in Panama, but definitely not in Cuba.
I'll tell you what, I had a bar that was 14 foot long in my house. And I'd get all the officers from the Army, the Coast Guard, the Air Force, and I'd say, what's your favorite bottle? And I'd have it on, and I'd stock it. I'd pay for it. I'd have Cuban cigars there. My neighbor was
going to ask if you could get Cuban cigars.
So We wouldn't get him in Cuba. He'd fly somewhere else and pick him up. But I kept my door open because the Army people were under a lot more stress than we were under. I said, look, this door's open all the time. Your bottle's there. Watch TV. I had a big patio out back. I says, enjoy yourself. The only thing is if you get drunk, you'll never be allowed in this house again. And just turn off the lights when you leave, because I'd be sleeping upstairs. Me and the captain would be sleeping, you know, because our quarters were upstairs. But we'll let anyone come in the house. And did they have the month rule where you weren't allowed to drink the first month you were there, or the month you were leaving? Did they have that rule in place then?
Yeah, it's still in place. We also would, if there were, 3 or more alcohol related incidents, and the whole island or all the Army would go dry. But to your point, Rich, you're saying, so I was there in 2005 to 2006, and my partner was there from 2019 to 2020, and he would say things like, oh, we're going to go to this restaurant, or we're going to this bar. And I'm like, what? Like, it's just funny that he was in the same exact location, just a completely different experience.
Oh yeah. Up to Rick's. Yeah. Whatever.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'm the same, Erica. I have no idea what Rich is talking about. None of that. Yeah, I bars and restaurants. What? No.
Well, see, I used to drive around and pick Army people up, and then I'd get them in the car, and I'd take them to Subway or McDonald's. I'd say how things are going, and I could tell a lot of stories. But the one Army guy, his wife was in labor. She was having a difficult pregnancy. And she asked if he could come home. She was due to deliver. And her husband over at one of the guards was a basket case, and the Army wouldn't let him go. So I went over. So the wife called me and said, can you do anything about it? I says, yeah, I can do something about it. So I went over and saw the sergeant major over there. And I says, what's up? Why aren't you letting this guy go home? You're supposed to take leave, right? I said, the guy's a basket case. So he still didn't want to let the guy go. So I went over his head. I says, look, do I really need to do your job for you? Do I need to have a Navy chief come over here and show you how to do your job as a senior enlisted guy? So I got him off the island, and his wife didn't have the baby. He was gone for a week. Wife didn't have the baby. So he called for an extension. Guy said no again. I says, guess what? He's staying. Well, I'll report you. I said, who are you going to report me to? I'm the Inspector General. I said, you got to take better care of your people and quit being such a hard ass. So he came back. He was fine, had his head on straight. But yeah, you run into a few there. So yeah, we helped a lot of people. We just didn't fish and scuba dive all day.
We have a couple. Oh, go ahead. We have a couple minutes left. Erica, then Rick, and then Bob.
I was just going to comment too. I'm looking in the chat. So there was also we didn't have phones where we lived. The first house at the end of the development was called the phone house, and it was a room maybe 12 or 13, and you bought calling cards. It was $20 for 20 minutes, and that's what you got to call home. So obviously at E1, I'm new to the Army, can barely afford anything, so I get this calling card, and your phone calls are recorded, so you don't even have privacy, and you don't know that, but your leadership ends up telling you that. But yeah, so if there's an emergency going on at home or something to that extent, and you're $20 for 20 minutes, and you have to walk to this place. It's almost like a townhome, I guess, for those who haven't been there, with these old phones, and it wasn't even guaranteed that you were going to have a phone to talk on because people were in there. So that was another, I guess, part of the hardship tours. There was no access, and cell phones weren't really a thing.
Rick, you said, was it Radio Shack that you had to call home through? And you also said something about you had a top secret clearance, but you didn't have to sign off on it.
No, I never was muted for anything. I never had to sign anything. Julia, our World War II code breaker, wasn't until 72 that she found out she could have told her husband all about it. But anyhow, no, our Caribbean group was there in 1970. We were in port. I took 2 slides while I was there, and we were there for an inspection. And that's basically all current situations.
Bob Flage?
Yes, sir. Now, I've got a question about the bay itself. From what I have heard, there's no ships actually assigned there at this point. Is that correct?
There never were any ships assigned there. That was just a stopover point. But
Okay.
there's still ships that come
Because
in.
my question would be, with the inclement weather, hurricanes or whatever, what type of, if there were no ships there, then I guess it's a moot question, but it would have been, would they get off, get out of the bay and just disappear for a while, or,
Oh yeah, you leave the bay, you get out of the path of the storm. You don't stay at anchor, you don't stay at the pier.
Okay.
So the whole base, would the whole base sort of shut down whenever there was a hurricane coming through?
Well, yeah, used to have hurricane kits. And, the one fellow mentioned bomb shelter. So what happened is during a hurricane, the medical staff went with the detainees, okay? And they got treated first. They were treated better than the Army people, Navy, and military on the base. But yeah, you'd go to your hurricane bunkers and you'd have everything from batteries to flashlights to MREs to hunker down in case there was a hurricane.
Interesting. In the chat, I put the survey. It's a quick 2 to 3 minute survey. It's just for anybody who joined us tonight that would like to give us some feedback on the program. Helps us sort of develop further programming and future programming. Please take a few minutes to fill that out for us. We always watch that very closely. I want to thank you all for joining tonight. I know it's sort of like usually we have 1 or 2 veterans that sort of join us and talk about a very particular subject, but I kind of liked going around the room tonight and really getting an idea of like different eras, what it was like. And like I said, I was very surprised by a lot of the things that were talked about tonight, mainly because I have no idea what life was like down there or is like currently. Glenn, would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, fascinating. I learned an awful lot tonight. Thanks very much to all you vets.
Absolutely. Rich, yeah, I think that's a great idea to do a part 2 of this. I know we're already well into February in our scheduling for next year, every Monday coming up into the new year. So we'll have to do another Guantanamo program and maybe get more of your insight as the Inspector General of that area and, dive into a bit more of the history.
Sure.
And again, thank you all for joining us. Erica, thank you again for getting this ball rolling. I really appreciate everybody here tonight. We have an in-person breakfast that is going to be hosted by Ben Wright on Wednesday because, as you could tell, I probably couldn't lift a mic at this point. But Ben's going to be so gracious to host our Wednesday morning breakfast at Christchurch or Grove Farm. We will be back next Monday talking about with Bob Connor, I believe, about mass graves in Vietnam that he helps out with those. Very interesting story. That'll be next Monday. And then we have another breakfast in Beaver that I plan to be better for and host on Wednesday, December 6th. Thank you all so much. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Again, thank you so much to our veterans for joining us and talking to us about Guantanamo Bay tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Sean.